You're watching TV, the game is on a commercial break. An ad for a car comes on. You see sweeping landscapes, winding coastal roads, a feeling of pure freedom. And underneath it all, there's this music. A piano melody, maybe a driving drum beat. It's perfect. It makes you feel something. The commercial ends, the game comes back on, but the song stays with you. You find yourself humming it later that day. You can hear the entire melody in your head perfectly. But if someone asked you, "What's that song called?" you draw a complete blank. You know the product. You know the feeling. But the name of the art that created that feeling? It's gone. A ghost in your memory. This is not an accident. This is by design. What you just experienced isn't just a catchy tune in an ad. It's one of the most powerful and subtle forms of persuasion ever invented. It's a multi-million-dollar industry built on a single powerful premise. A few carefully chosen musical notes can bypass the cynical, ad-blocking part of your brain and speak directly to your emotions. They can make a pickup truck feel like a symbol of American grit, a smartphone feel like the future in your hand, or an insurance company feel like a lifelong trusted friend. These instrumental tracks are the unsung heroes and the secret weapons of modern advertising. And for the next 10 episodes, we are going to pull back the curtain. We're not just going to give you a list of songs. We are going to tell you their names, their secret histories, and the fascinating stories of how these pieces of music, sometimes forgotten classical masterpieces, sometimes obscure indie tracks, sometimes funk anthems, became the unofficial anthems for some of the biggest brands in the United States. By the end of this series, you won't just be able to name that tune. You'll understand the psychological alchemy that turns a simple melody into a billion-dollar brand identity. You'll never listen to a commercial the same way again. So, let's start with arguably the most successful and long-running sonic marriage in American advertising history. I want you to listen in your head for a second. Think of a sound that means flying. Not the roar of a jet engine, but the idea of flying. The romance of it. The sophistication. The feeling of watching a city shrink below you as you ascend into the clouds. There's a sound for that. It starts with a single audacious clarinet, sliding up the scale in a way that's both playful and impossibly grand. Then the piano comes in, a cascade of notes that feel like the twinkling lights of a metropolis at night. You know the one. That piece of music is George Gershwin's 1924 masterpiece, Rhapsody in Blue. And for over 3 decades, it has been the soul of United Airlines. This wasn't just a lucky choice. It was a stroke of marketing genius that has become the gold standard for sonic branding. To understand why it works so well, we have to go back to the Roaring '20s, to a young, ambitious composer who was about to change American music forever. George Gershwin was a star. He was the king of Tin Pan Alley, churning out hit songs for Broadway. But he had a bigger ambition. He wanted to shatter the wall between popular music, the jazz and blues pouring out of clubs, and the serious music being played in concert halls. He believed the soul of America could be found in its rhythms, and he wanted to put that soul on the world's biggest stage. In late 1923, the famous bandleader Paul Whiteman announced a major concert called An Experiment in Modern Music, designed to prove that jazz was a serious art form. And one morning, Gershwin's brother Ira showed him a newspaper article announcing that the concert's grand finale would be a brand new jazz concerto written by George Gershwin. This was news to George. He hadn't even agreed to write it yet. With the concert only 5 weeks away, he was trapped. He had to produce a masterpiece on a deadline. The legend goes that the core idea for the piece didn't come to him in a quiet studio, but on a train ride to Boston. He said later, "It was on the train with its steely rhythms, its rattle-bang that I suddenly heard, and even saw on paper, the complete construction of the Rhapsody from beginning to end. I heard it as a sort of musical kaleidoscope of America, of our vast melting pot, of our unduplicated national pep, of our blues, our metropolitan madness." He scribbled furiously, and when he got to rehearsals, a little bit of magic happened. The now iconic opening, that wild soaring clarinet glissando, wasn't even in the original score. During a rehearsal as a joke, the clarinetist Ross Gorman played the opening run as a long comical smear. Gershwin absolutely loved it. He told him, "Do it that way from now on." That moment of spontaneous fun became one of the most recognizable openings in all of music. The premiere on February 12, 1924, was a landmark event. The audience, filled with the most important musical figures of the day, was stunned. They had never heard anything like it. It was classical, it was jazz, it was Broadway. It was the sound of New York City, of ambition, of the modern age. all rolled into one breathtaking piece of music. Rhapsody in Blue didn't just make Gershwin a legend, it gave America its own classical voice. So, fast forward 60 years to the 1980s. The world is different. The airline industry had just been deregulated, and the skies had become a battleground. Airlines were cutting prices, fighting for routes, and struggling to stand out. They weren't just selling plane tickets anymore, they had to sell an experience and identity. United Airlines, a legacy carrier with deep American roots, needed an anthem. They needed a sound that could cut through the noise and convey a message of quality, reliability, and a uniquely American sense of optimism. Someone at their ad agency, Leo Burnett, had a flash of brilliance. They licensed Rhapsody in Blue, and it worked. It worked on a level that is almost impossible to replicate. Why? Because everything Gershwin poured into that piece on that train ride in 1924 was exactly what United wanted to sell in 1986. The music is sophisticated but not stuffy. It's complex but soaringly melodic. It's full of energy, movement, and the metropolitan madness Gershwin talked about. It was the perfect soundtrack for a company that connects the great cities of America and the world. When you heard Rhapsody in Blue, over a shot of a 747 gracefully taking off, the music told you a story. It wasn't just about getting from point A to point B. It was about ambition. It was about connection. It was about the grand romantic adventure of travel. It elevated the brand from a simple mode of transportation to a piece of the American dream. The music gave the airline a soul. The campaign, famously dubbed the Friendly Skies, became iconic, and Gershwin's Rhapsody was its beating heart. For over 30 years, through airline mergers, bankruptcies, and global crises, that music has been the one constant. It's become so intertwined with the brand that for millions of people, it's impossible to hear one without thinking of the other. United Airlines doesn't just use Rhapsody in Blue. In the court of public opinion, they own it. It's a masterclass in long-term branding, a testament to the power of finding the perfect piece of music and sticking with it. It all goes back to a composer on a train, capturing the sound of a nation on the move, a sound that would, decades later, come to define the experience of flying through its skies. But what happens when the goal isn't to sound grand and epic? What happens when an advertiser wants to create a feeling of quiet intimacy, of gentle melancholy, of discovering something beautiful and unknown? Sometimes the most powerful song isn't a sweeping orchestra, but the hushed voice of a forgotten folk singer. A choice so perfect and so unexpected that it can turn a 30-second car commercial into a cultural phenomenon. And in the year 2000, that phenomenon took the form of four young friends, driving silently under the glow of a full moon in a Volkswagen Cabrio. They're not talking, they're not laughing, they're just being in the moment, sharing a quiet, profound experience. The wind is in their hair, the night is beautiful, and the only sound is a simple, haunting acoustic guitar melody and a hushed, almost whispered vocal. The song was called Pink Moon, and for the 99.9% of Americans watching, it was a complete mystery. It sounded ancient and modern all at once. It was melancholic, beautiful, and deeply, deeply human. In an era of loud, fast-cutting, in-your-face advertising, this commercial was a poem. It didn't shout, it breathed. And at the end, a simple tagline appeared on screen. Drivers wanted. But the question on everyone's mind wasn't about the car. It was, what was that song? The ad agency, Arnold Worldwide, had stumbled upon a ghost. The artist was Nick Drake, a British folk singer who had released 3 brilliant, commercially unsuccessful albums in the early 1970s. He was a man out of time, a sensitive, reclusive soul whose intricate guitar work and fragile, world-weary voice failed to connect with the glam rock and pop sensibilities of his era. Plagued by severe depression, he died in 1974 from an overdose of antidepressants at the age of 26. For a quarter of a century, he was little more than a cult figure, a musician's musician, mourned by a small but fiercely loyal following. His music was the definition of obscure. Choosing his song Pink Moon for a car commercial was not just a risk, it was borderline insane. Car ads were supposed to be about freedom, power, excitement. They used upbeat rock anthems or soaring orchestral scores. Pink Moon was the opposite of all that. It's a song that lasts just 2 minutes, featuring nothing but Drake's voice and his acoustic guitar. It's a sketch, a feeling, a moment of stark, lonely beauty. The agency executives knew they were playing with fire. They presented the ad to Volkswagen, fully expecting to be laughed out of the room. But a few key decision-makers at VW felt what the creatives felt. They understood that the commercial wasn't selling horsepower or handling. It was selling a feeling of connection, of quiet magic, of a moment so perfect you don't need to speak. They approved it. The night the commercial first aired, something incredible happened. In the nascent days of the mainstream internet, search engines lit up. Message boards exploded. People were calling radio stations, desperate to identify this beautiful, heartbreaking piece of music. Volkswagen's website, which cleverly offered a link to buy the song, was overwhelmed with traffic and crashed. In the weeks that followed, Nick Drake's album, also titled Pink Moon, began to sell in staggering numbers. An album that had sold maybe a few thousand copies in the 27 years since its release was now selling 5,000 copies a week. It shot onto the Amazon bestseller list. It entered the Billboard charts for the first time ever. A dead man, forgotten by the music industry, was suddenly a star. The Pink Moon commercial did more than just sell a lot of convertibles and a lot of albums. It fundamentally changed the game. It proved that authenticity and emotion could be more powerful than any jingle. It showed that audiences were sophisticated, and that a piece of genuine, challenging art could break through the commercial clutter and forge a real connection. It was a watershed moment that ripped open the doors for a new kind of soundtrack. Suddenly, ad agencies weren't just looking for the next big pop hit. They were digging through crates, searching for the forgotten gems, the indie darlings, the obscure tracks that could give their brand a soul. The commercial didn't just resurrect Nick Drake. It resurrected the idea that a 30-second spot could be a vessel for discovery and genuine artistic beauty. But what happens when that discovery isn't an accident? What if it's a deliberate, calculated, and brilliant strategy? As the new millennium dawned, another artist very much alive would take the principle established by the Pink Moon effect and turn it into a global phenomenon. His name was Moby, and his laboratory was a single album, Play. If Nick Drake was a ghost accidentally brought back to life, Moby was a marketing genius who saw the future. By 1999, Moby was a critically respected but commercially modest electronic artist. His new album, Play, was a gorgeous, soulful fusion of electronic beats, gospel samples, and blues vocals. It was critically acclaimed, but radio didn't know what to do with it. It wasn't rock, it wasn't pop, it wasn't hip-hop. So it languished. Moby and his team decided on a radical, unprecedented course of action. If they couldn't get the songs on the radio, they would get them everywhere else. They made a simple, stunning decision. They would license every single song from the album for use in commercials, films, and TV shows. It was a flood. Suddenly, the ethereal, haunting piano chords of Porcelain weren't just on an album. They were selling Bailey's Irish Cream. They were in the trailer for the Leonardo DiCaprio movie The Beach. The driving, energetic blues sample of Body Rock was powering a commercial for Rolling Rock beer. The joyful, uplifting gospel cry of Find My Baby was in an ad for American Express, featuring Tiger Woods. It was inescapable. You couldn't turn on a television for a year without hearing a track from Play. This was a completely different animal from the Nick Drake story. This wasn't a lucky find. It was a saturation bombing campaign. And it worked better than anyone could have possibly imagined. The constant exposure created a strange, powerful sense of familiarity. People heard the songs in ads, recognized them, and then went out to buy the album to hear them in their entirety. Play went on to sell over 12 million copies worldwide, becoming the biggest-selling electronica album of all time. The strategy, however, wasn't without its critics. To many in the indie and alternative scenes, it was the ultimate act of selling out. Moby was accused of cheapening his art, of turning his soulful music into mere background noise for corporate messaging. But Moby himself was unapologetic. He argued that in a fractured media landscape where radio was no longer the sole gatekeeper, licensing was a legitimate way for an artist to find an audience. He wasn't giving his music away. He was using the massive reach of advertising as his own personal radio station, broadcasting his unique sound to every corner of the globe. What Moby and the Play album proved was that the relationship between music and advertising had evolved into a powerful symbiosis. A commercial could make a song famous, but just as importantly, a song could give a brand an instant identity, a prepackaged mood. The instrumental hooks of songs like Porcelain became emotional shorthand. Ad agencies no longer had to spend millions building a mood from scratch. They could just license it for a fee. It was efficient, it was effective, and it completely redefined the sound of television. It created a world where the coolest songs you heard all day weren't on the radio, but in between your favorite shows. The line between art and commerce had not just been blurred. It had been remixed, sampled, and looped into a powerful new rhythm, one that questioned the very definition of what a song was for. Is a song a pure expression of an artist's soul? Or is it a tool? A piece of emotional technology that can be deployed to make you feel a certain way about a car, a credit card, or a cup of coffee? The answer, it turns out, is both. And sometimes it's a piece of emotional technology so potent, so perfectly engineered, that it can build a $100 billion empire on the back of just 5 simple notes. In the early 1990s, the Intel Corporation had a massive problem. They made the most important part of the personal computer, the microprocessor, the brain, but nobody knew who they were. You didn't buy an Intel. You bought an IBM, a Compaq, a Dell. Intel was an invisible ingredient, and they were tired of being invisible. Their marketing chief, Dennis Carter, hatched a brilliant, audacious plan: Intel Inside. The goal was to make consumers care about the chip inside their machine. But how do you brand something you can't see, touch, or even really understand? You give it a voice. You create a sound. They turned to an Austrian composer named Walter Werzowa. The brief he received was abstract but specific. The sound had to convey reliability, innovation, and satisfaction. It had to be the sonic equivalent of the Intel Inside logo. Werzowa approached it like a puzzle. He took the rhythm of the slogan itself, Intel Inside. Da-da-da-da-da. 5 syllables, 5 notes. He began experimenting, layering sounds. He used xylophones, marimbas, and all sorts of synthesizers, meticulously crafting each note. He wanted a sound that was both synthetic and organic, digital and human. The result was a 3-second sequence that would become one of the most heard pieces of music on the planet. The famous Intel Bong. Those 5 notes, arranged in a simple, memorable melody, were a masterpiece of sonic branding. It wasn't a song in the traditional sense. It was a sonic trigger, a tiny piece of audio designed to burrow into your subconscious. And it worked better than anyone could have possibly imagined. Intel poured money into the campaign, offering to co-fund advertising for any computer manufacturer that used their chips, on one condition. They had to display the Intel Inside logo and play that 5-note sound at the end of their commercial. Suddenly it was everywhere. At the end of every computer ad, on every channel, day and night, you heard it: bong, 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 bong. That sound became synonymous with quality. It was the sound of a fast, reliable computer. It was the sound of the future. Consumers, who previously had no idea what a microprocessor was, started walking into stores and asking, "Does it have Intel inside?" The campaign transformed Intel from an anonymous component supplier into one of the world's most powerful consumer brands. And it was all built on a tiny instrumental jingle that was never meant to be art, but a tool, a piece of emotional technology. That, however, is only one side of the coin. That's the story of a sound built in a lab, specifically designed to sell a product. But what happens when the opposite occurs? What happens when a piece of pure, unadulterated art, a sprawling, complex masterpiece created decades earlier, is lifted from the concert hall and placed into a television commercial? This is the story of a piece of music so quintessentially American that it could define not just a product, but an entire industry. In 1924, a young composer named George Gershwin was commissioned to write a piece for a concert titled An Experiment in Modern Music. In just a few weeks, he composed a revolutionary work that fused the worlds of classical music and American jazz. He called it Rhapsody in Blue. That iconic, unforgettable opening, the long, climbing wail of the clarinet, was like the sound of a new world being born. The music was a portrait of New York City, of the American melting pot. It was chaotic, beautiful, ambitious, and soaring. It was the sound of a nation hitting its stride. For over 60 years, that's what it was. A masterpiece of the American musical canon. Then, in the mid-1980s, United Airlines was searching for a new soul. They wanted to be more than just an airline. They wanted to be America's airline. They needed a sound that could convey sophistication, freedom, and the sheer romance of travel. Someone in a marketing meeting had an epiphany. They licensed Rhapsody in Blue. It was a stroke of genius. The music was a perfect fit. That opening clarinet run sounded like a jetliner lifting off the runway. The grand, sweeping orchestral passages felt like cruising above the clouds, watching the sprawling American landscape unfold beneath you. The music didn't just accompany the visuals of planes flying over majestic cities and landscapes. It became the emotional engine of the entire brand. For an entire generation, hearing Rhapsody in Blue didn't just evoke images of a 1920s concert hall. It triggered the feeling of walking through an airport, the anticipation of a vacation, the quiet hum of a cabin at 35,000 feet. United's Fly the Friendly Skies campaign, powered by Gershwin's symphony, became one of the most enduring and beloved ad campaigns of all time. It was a multi-million-dollar gamble that paid off spectacularly. The airline reportedly paid hundreds of thousands of dollars a year just for the rights, a testament to the music's power. In a strange way, the commercial use didn't cheapen the music. For millions of Americans, a United commercial was their first, and perhaps only exposure to this incredible piece of classical music. The airline had successfully borrowed a half-century of cultural equity and emotion, and seamlessly attached it to their brand. So you have two polar opposite examples. The Intel jingle, a 3-second soundbite, scientifically engineered from scratch to create a brand out of thin air. And Rhapsody in Blue, a 17-minute symphonic jazz epic, a cultural treasure adopted to redefine an existing one. Both are instrumental, both are iconic, and both prove that a melody, whether it's 5 notes long or 17 minutes long, can be one of the most powerful marketing tools ever invented. They represent two different paths to the same destination: your heart, and by extension, your wallet. So we've seen a sound built from scratch to create a brand, and a classic masterpiece borrowed to define one. But what happens when the song isn't famous yet? What happens when an ad campaign doesn't just use a song, but actually makes the song and the band a global phenomenon? The line between art and commerce gets even blurrier, and the results, well, they changed music forever. The year is 2003. The music industry is in a state of absolute panic. Napster has torn a hole in the universe, CD sales are plummeting, and nobody knows what the future holds. Then, a company known for beige computers decides to change everything. Apple wasn't just launching a product with the iPod, they were launching a cultural revolution. And every revolution needs a soundtrack. But they didn't pick a song by U2 or the Rolling Stones or any established giant. They picked a noisy, swaggering garage rock anthem from a completely unknown band from Australia. The song was, "Are You Gonna Be My Girl?" The band was Jet. And the commercial, it was a work of genius. It was pure silhouette. No faces, no celebrities, just black outlines of people dancing with ecstatic abandon against vibrant, single-color backgrounds. The only things you could see clearly were the product itself. The white iPod and the iconic white earbuds, bouncing and flying around as the silhouettes moved. It was stylish, it was mysterious, and it was impossibly cool. It didn't feel like an ad for a tech gadget. It felt like an invitation to the coolest party in the world. And the music was the engine driving the entire thing. That thumping, relentless bass line, borrowed shamelessly from Iggy Pop's Lust for Life. The tambourine shaking like a rattlesnake, and that raw, desperate scream of the title. It was pure, unadulterated energy. It was the sound of liberation. The sound of having 10,000 songs in your pocket. The commercial and the song were inseparable. You couldn't hear one without picturing the other. For Jet, it was like being struck by lightning. One day, they're a band from Melbourne trying to get noticed. The next, their song is being beamed into every living room in America, dozens of times a night. The iPod commercial song became a global phenomenon. It rocketed up the charts. It was everywhere. The ad didn't just borrow the song's cool factor. It created it on a massive scale. Apple needed a track with raw, untamed energy to sell their vision of musical freedom. Jet needed a platform bigger than any radio station could offer. It was the perfect symbiotic relationship, and it created a blueprint for the next decade of music marketing. The ad didn't just sell iPods. It sold Jet, and it proved that a 30-second commercial could be more powerful than a year of touring. But if the Jet phenomenon was lightning in a bottle, what happened 4 years later showed it was a repeatable formula, a new law of physics in the music industry. By 2007, the iPod was king, and Apple was launching the smaller, more colorful iPod Nano. They needed a new sound. Not the raw power of garage rock, but something whimsical. Something charming, joyful, and utterly infectious. They found it in a Canadian indie artist named Leslie Feist. Feist was a critical darling, a respected member of the indie collective Broken social scene. She made beautiful, intricate, and often melancholic music. She was not, by any stretch of the imagination, a pop star. Her song, 1234, was this quirky, hand-clapping, banjo-plucking tune that felt like it belonged in a charming, small-budget indie film. It was the furthest thing from the slick, overproduced pop that dominated the radio. And then, Apple put it in their commercial. The ad was a burst of pure joy. We see the colorful iPod Nanos, and a single hand opens up to reveal the screen, where a music video is playing. And it's the video for 1234. We see Feist and a group of dancers in vibrant blue sequined outfits, performing a wonderfully simple coordinated dance in a giant warehouse. The camera pulls back and back and back, revealing more dancers, more color, more infectious energy. The effect was instantaneous and seismic. 1234 exploded. It went from a song beloved by a few thousand indie fans to a top 10 hit on the Billboard Hot 100. It was nominated for 2 Grammy Awards, including Best New Artist for Feist. She performed the song at the Grammy ceremony, a spectacle that would have been unthinkable just a year prior. An ad for an MP3 player had catapulted a niche Canadian artist onto the biggest stage in music. This was different from Jet. This wasn't just about energy, it was about curation. Apple was now a tastemaker. They were telling millions of people, this is the cool new song you need to hear. Getting your song in an iPod ad became the new holy grail for musicians. It was a golden ticket, more valuable than a record deal, because it didn't just get you heard. It got you seen as the soundtrack to the future. The line between art and commerce wasn't just blurry. It had been erased and redrawn as a vibrant, dancing silhouette. But Apple wasn't the only company that understood the power of a perfectly placed, unexpected song. While they were building a brand on minimalist cool, another company was using music to sell pure, unadulterated, almost spiritual joy. In the same year that Jet was taking over the world, Volkswagen was trying to sell the feeling of driving a Beetle convertible with the top down on a perfect sunny day. How do you capture that feeling in a sound? You can't use a standard pop song. You need something overwhelming, something that sounds like the sun itself is singing. You need the polyphonic spree. Imagine a band, if you can even call it that. It's more like a musical commune. 24 people on stage. A full choir, a harpist, a French horn player, a theremin, all dressed in flowing white robes like a beatific cult. And their music is a tidal wave of positive energy. A wall of sound designed to induce pure euphoria. Their signature song, Light in Day / Reach for the Sun, is the perfect example. It starts simply, a gentle piano and a single voice, but it builds and builds, adding layers of voices and instruments until it becomes this massive, glorious choral explosion of happiness. It is objectively a very weird song by a very weird band. And Volkswagen put it in their commercial. The ad was simple. People driving, smiling, enjoying the sun in their convertible. But laid over these simple images was the sound of the polyphonic spree. It was transformative. The song didn't just complement the visuals. It elevated them into something profound. It made driving a car feel like a transcendent experience. The music was so arresting, so different from anything else on television, that it stopped you in your tracks. People didn't just notice the song, they became obsessed with it. What is that choir song from the Volkswagen commercial? Became a common refrain on internet forums. The polyphonic spree, an act that was the very definition of niche, was suddenly being heard by millions of people who would never have stumbled upon them otherwise. The ad gave them a platform to share their unique brand of overwhelming optimism with the world. It proved that a commercial didn't have to pick a song that was already popular, or even a song that was trying to be popular. It could pick something utterly strange and beautiful, and if the emotion was right, the audience would follow. So we've seen the birth of the ad-made star. A rock band, an indie darling, a symphonic pop cult. All of them launched into the stratosphere not by radio or MTV, but by a 30-second spot designed to sell a product. The ad agency became the new A&R department, scouting for fresh sounds to define their brand. But this power, the power to pluck a song from obscurity and make it a hit, raises an even more fascinating question. If a commercial can create a new star from scratch, can it also resurrect a ghost? What happens when a song isn't just unknown, but completely forgotten? A classic hit that has faded from memory, only to be shocked back to life by an ad, sparking a second wave of fame even bigger and more bizarre than the first. The story of commercial-driven resurrection. That's where the magic gets even stranger. The year is 1999. The world is holding its breath, caught between the nostalgia of a closing century and the anxious, electric promise of a new millennium. And on television screens across America, a quiet little revolution begins. It's not loud. It's not flashy. It's a commercial for a Volkswagen Cabrio. For young friends are driving through the night. The top is down. A luminous, impossibly large moon hangs in the sky, bathing everything in a soft, ethereal light. They don't speak. They don't have to. They just drive, sharing a silent, perfect moment of connection. And underneath it all, a piece of music plays. It's just an acoustic guitar, intricately picked, and a hushed, melancholic voice. The melody is haunting, simple, and feels ancient, like a folk song whispered across generations. Viewers were captivated, not just by the car but by the mood, by the feeling, and overwhelmingly by the song. In the nascent days of the internet, message boards and forums lit up with a single desperate question. What is that song? Who is that singing? The answer, when it came, was more surprising and more poignant than anyone could have imagined. The song was called Pink Moon. The artist was Nick Drake, and he had been dead for 25 years. This wasn't just a case of an ad using a cool old song. This was a seance. It was a commercial that reached back through time, found a ghost, and introduced him to the world that had ignored him his entire life. To understand the sheer impossibility of this moment, you have to understand who Nick Drake was. He was an anti-star, a brilliant, painfully shy English musician who released 3 albums between 1969 and 1972. They are now considered timeless masterpieces of folk music, but at the time they sold almost nothing. Drake was a phantom in his own career. He hated performing live, gave almost no interviews, and seemed to retreat further and further into himself with each album. His music was quiet, introspective, and laced with a profound sadness that the bombastic rock and roll world of the early 70s just wasn't equipped to handle. His final album, Pink Moon, was his most sparse and haunting. He walked into the studio, recorded all 11 songs in 2 nights with just his voice and guitar, dropped the master tapes at the front desk of his record label, and walked away. 2 years later, in 1974, he died from an overdose of antidepressants at the age of 26. And for decades that was the end of the story. Nick Drake became a footnote, a cult figure whispered about by dedicated music collectors and fellow musicians, but utterly unknown to the general public. He was a secret. So how, a quarter of a century later, does this forgotten ghost become the soundtrack for a major car commercial? The credit goes to a pair of creatives at the ad agency Arnold Worldwide, who were part of that small, devoted cult of Nick Drake fans. They believed the song's quiet, contemplative mood was the perfect fit for the feeling they wanted to sell. Not speed or luxury, but a moment of pure, unadulterated peace. A driver's wanted moment. It was an incredibly risky pitch. Conventional advertising wisdom said you use upbeat, positive, major key music to sell products. You don't use a somber, melancholic folk song from a long-dead, unknown artist to sell a fun-in-the-sun convertible. It made no sense. But Volkswagen, to their eternal credit, said yes. They understood that they weren't just selling a car. They were selling an emotion, an identity. The ad, titled Milky Way, aired, and the effect was immediate and seismic. Volkswagen's website was so inundated with inquiries about the music that they had to add a section specifically identifying the song and the artist. Soon, they began including the caption, featuring the music of Nick Drake, right there in the commercial. The secret was out, and the resurrection began. Sales of the Pink Moon album didn't just increase, they exploded. It shot into the top 5 of Amazon's music charts. Nick Drake, the man who couldn't sell records to save his life, was now outselling contemporary pop stars. It is estimated that he sold more albums in the first year after that commercial aired than he did in his entire lifetime. A whole new generation, kids who weren't even born when he died, were discovering his music, falling in love with his tragic, beautiful story. The commercial didn't just license a song. It unlocked a time capsule. It gave Nick Drake the audience he never had, the recognition he so deeply deserved but could never achieve. The Volkswagen ad for the Cabrio fundamentally changed the game. It proved that a commercial could be more than a sales pitch. It could be an act of cultural curation, could be a history lesson, could be a tribute. It demonstrated that audiences were sophisticated enough to appreciate nuance, melancholy, and artistry in a 30-second spot. It greenlit a future where advertising could take real artistic risks, using music not just as a catchy jingle, but as the emotional core of the story. The ad didn't just sell cars. It sold an album. It sold a mood. And in the process, it rewrote the legacy of a forgotten genius, proving that a great song never truly dies. It's just waiting for the right moment, the right messenger to be heard again. But this story, the tale of a single song being pulled from the mists of time, represents only one kind of commercial power. It's the story of rediscovery. What happens when the script is flipped? What happens when commercials don't just rediscover music, but actively create the environment for a new sound to be born and to thrive? What if an entire genre of music, a whole aesthetic that defined a decade, owes its very existence not to smoky clubs or pirate radio stations, but to the pristine, calculated world of advertising. We're moving from the resurrection of a ghost to the corporate creation of a sound. A sound you probably have on your favorite chill-out playlist right now, without ever realizing you first heard it trying to sell you a credit card or a luxury sedan. That sound, more often than not, was crafted by a bald, vegan electronic musician from New York City, working out of his bedroom studio, convinced his career was over. His name is Richard Melville Hall, but the world knows him as Moby. And the album he created in that moment of near despair wasn't just a collection of songs, it was a Trojan horse. It snuck into our subconscious through the side door of advertising and ended up conquering the world. The album was called Play, and its most iconic instrumental, the one that truly defined an era of sophisticated, minimalist advertising, is Porcelain. To understand the monumental impact of Porcelain, you have to understand the context. It's 1999. Moby is, for all intents and purposes, a has-been. His early 90s techno hit Go was a distant memory. His last album, a furious punk rock record called Animal Rights, had been a commercial and critical disaster. He was dropped by his record label in the US, he was deep in debt, and the cool kids of the music press had written him off. So he retreated to his small New York apartment and started making music for himself, convinced no one else would ever hear it. He started sampling old, obscure folk, blues and gospel recordings from an anthology collected by the ethnomusicologist Alan Lomax. He would take these raw, haunting, century-old vocal snippets and weave them into a tapestry of breakbeats, synths and melancholic piano lines. The result was Play, and when it was released it did absolutely nothing. It sold a measly 6,000 copies in its first week. Radio stations wouldn't touch it. MTV, the kingmaker of the 90s, completely ignored it. The album was dead on arrival. It was the final nail in the coffin of Moby's career. Or so it seemed. This is where the story takes a legendary turn. Moby and his manager had a crazy, desperate, and frankly unprecedented idea. If the traditional gatekeepers of culture wouldn't let them in, they would simply go around them. They decided they would license every single one of the album's 18 tracks for free, or for a very small fee, to anyone who wanted to use them. Ad agencies, independent filmmakers, TV show producers, anyone. It was a fire sale. The logic was simple. We can't get the music on the radio, so let's get it on everything else. Let's make this music so inescapable, so ubiquitous that people are forced to ask, what is that song? In the late 90s, this was heresy. The ultimate sin for any serious artist was to sell out. Putting your music in a car commercial was seen as a betrayal of artistic integrity. But Moby had nothing to lose. And so the floodgates opened. Suddenly, the mournful blues of Natural Blues was selling luxury sedans. The upbeat gospel stomp of Find My Baby was the soundtrack to an American Express commercial featuring Tiger Woods. And then there was Porcelain. Porcelain was different. It didn't have a prominent vocal sample. It was built on a foundation of simple, beautiful, and profoundly sad-sounding piano chords. Over this, a wash of ethereal, ambient synthesizers created a feeling of vast, open space. The melody, carried by a synthesized string section, is one of the most recognizable instrumental hooks of the last 30 years. It's simple, elegant, and dripping with a kind of bittersweet nostalgia. It's a sound that feels like a memory you can't quite place. It's introspective, calm, and deeply emotional without ever telling you how to feel. And that was its genius. That emotional ambiguity made it the perfect blank canvas for advertisers. For a Volkswagen Jetta commercial, Porcelain could evoke the quiet freedom of the open road. For a Nordstrom ad, it conveyed a sense of understated luxury and class. For a Bailey's Irish cream spot, it suggested warmth and sophisticated comfort. The song didn't sell a product. It sold a feeling. It sold an aspirational lifestyle. It was the audio equivalent of a minimalist, high-end furniture catalog. It was clean, it was modern, and it made whatever it was attached to feel more expensive, more thoughtful, more important. The strategy worked better than anyone could have possibly imagined. The album Play, which had been a colossal flop, slowly began to climb the charts. People would hear Porcelain while watching a movie trailer or a commercial for a bank, and the melody would get stuck in their heads. They'd hunt it down in record stores. The album didn't explode. It seeped into the public consciousness. By the year 2000, you couldn't escape it. It was the unofficial soundtrack to the new millennium. The album went on to sell over 12 million copies. It topped the charts in more than 20 countries and became the single best-selling electronic album of all time. Moby, the washed-up techno artist, became a global superstar. not by fighting the system, but by letting the system do all the work for him. Porcelain changed the game. It proved that a commercial wasn't just a place to stick a pre-existing pop hit. An advertisement could be the primary vehicle for a song's discovery. It created a feedback loop. The ads made the song famous, and the song's fame made it even more desirable for other ads. It also cemented a specific sound in the marketing world, the corporate chill aesthetic. That blend of down-tempo electronic beats, ambient textures, and pensive piano chords became the go-to sound for any brand wanting to project an image of intelligence, calm, and modern sophistication. Think Apple. Think financial services. Think pharmaceuticals. The DNA of Porcelain is all over it. What's truly remarkable is how the song has endured. Stripped away from the commercials, it doesn't feel like a jingle. It stands on its own as a beautiful piece of instrumental music. It became a staple of chill-out playlists, yoga studio soundtracks, and late-night study sessions. For millions of people, Porcelain is a genuinely moving piece of art, a song that holds personal meaning and memories. And most of them have no idea that their first encounter with it was likely during a commercial break, sandwiched between an ad for laundry detergent and one for a fast food chain. It's the ultimate example of a sound created in artistic isolation that was adopted by commerce, and in doing so, achieved a level of cultural saturation that traditional methods could never have delivered. It wasn't a sellout, it was a masterclass in reverse engineering fame. From this meticulously crafted modern soundscape of the new millennium, we're now going to jump back in time. We're going to a place of raw, unbridled analog energy, a place of roaring guitars, thundering drums, and a riff so powerful, so primal, that it has become the universal shorthand for American muscle, rebellion, and pure, unapologetic cool. That riff, it's not just a collection of notes, it's an attitude, a strut, a lean. It's the sound of a leather jacket being zipped up, of sunglasses being put on at night. It's the sound of a car key confidently tossed in the air. The song is Green Onions by Booker T. and the MGs, and it is, without a doubt, one of the single coolest pieces of music ever committed to tape. To understand why this 2.5-minute instrumental became the go-to soundtrack for effortless cool, you have to go back to Memphis, Tennessee, in the summer of 1962. You have to picture a converted movie theater on East Macklemore Avenue, with a slanted floor and a sign outside that proudly read Soulsville, USA. This was Stax Records, a place where the sweltering southern heat seemed to cook up a sound that was gritty, soulful, and undeniably real. The house band at Stax was a group of prodigies, a rhythm section so tight, so intuitive, they seemed to operate on a single wavelength. They were Booker T. and the MGs. And the MGs, in this case, stood for Memphis Group. On the Hammond B3 organ was the band leader, Booker T. Jones, a teenager so gifted he was already a seasoned session musician. On the Fender Telecaster was Steve Cropper, a man whose guitar licks were so clean and economical they could cut glass. On drums, the unshakable in-the-pocket beat was provided by Al Jackson Jr., nicknamed the Human Timekeeper. And laying down the foundation on bass was Louis Steinberg. The most remarkable thing about this group wasn't just their incredible talent, it was their very existence. They were an integrated band, black and white, making music together in the heart of the segregated South. Inside the walls of Stax, the only color that mattered was the color of the notes. One fateful day, they were in the studio waiting for a rockabilly singer named Billy Lee Riley to show up for a session. He was running late. To kill time, the band started jamming. Booker T. began playing a slinky 12-bar blues riff on the organ, something he'd been toying with for a while. It was moody, hypnotic. Jackson fell in with a crisp, shuffling beat. Steinberg locked into a bass line that was pure groove. And then Cropper added his signature guitar stabs, sharp and percussive, like punctuation marks in a conversation. They weren't trying to write a hit. They were just passing the time, doing what they did best, making music. Up in the control booth, the head of Stax, Jim Stewart, heard what was happening on the studio floor. He wasn't a musician, he was a former country fiddle player and bank teller, but he had an ear for a hit. And what he was hearing was pure magic. He reportedly burst out of the booth, hit the record button on the monotape machine and yelled, "I don't know what you guys are playing, but just keep doing it." They did 2 takes. That was it. Lightning in a bottle. But it was almost a hit that never happened. They needed a B-side for another instrumental they had recorded called Behave Yourself. They decided to use this little organ jam. Now they just needed a name for it. The stories vary, but the best one is that Booker T. thought the riff was so low down and funky, He called it a stinky riff. He thought of things that were stinky, and for some reason green onions came to mind. So they called it Green Onions. The track that was supposed to be the A-side, Behave Yourself, was a fine tune, but it was polite. Green Onions was anything but. When the record was sent out to radio stations, a revolutionary DJ in Memphis named Reuben Washington at radio station WLOK did something that changed music history. He wasn't feeling the A-side. So he flipped the 45 revolutions per minute single over and played the B-side. The phone lines at the station lit up like a Christmas tree. People had never heard anything like it. It was raw, it was sophisticated, it was simple, it was complex. It was the sound of 4 guys in a room, perfectly in sync, creating a mood that was impossible to resist. The record label quickly repressed the single, this time with Green Onions as the A-side. It shot to number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100, a massive, unprecedented hit for a raw, bluesy instrumental. So what does this have to do with commercials? Everything. The magic that Jim Stewart and that Memphis DJ heard in 1962 is the exact same magic that advertising executives have been bottling for over half a century. Green Onions is a universal translator for cool. It needs no lyrics because the feeling it creates is primal. It's the soundtrack to confidence. When a luxury car brand like Mercedes-Benz or Audi wants to show their new sedan gliding through city streets at night, they don't need to tell you it's sophisticated and stylish. They play the opening notes of Green Onions, and you feel it. The slinky organ is the purr of the engine. The sharp guitar licks are the glint of the streetlights on the chrome. The song transforms a car from a mere mode of transportation into an accessory for a cooler version of yourself. Think of how many times you've seen it used in movies, often in a scene where a crew is getting together for a heist, like in Ocean's 11. The music plays as the characters are introduced, each one an expert in their field, each one impossibly cool and competent. The song says everything that needs to be said. These people are professionals. They've got this. The product being sold in a commercial, whether it's a pinstripe suit, a premium beer, or a high-tech smartphone, gets that same halo effect. The product becomes the key to unlocking that competence, that swagger. The power of Green Onions in advertising lies in its pure, unadulterated mood. It's a blank canvas for aspiration. Because it's instrumental, it doesn't clutter the message with words. It injects a feeling directly into your bloodstream. It doesn't suggest a story. It suggests a state of being. And that state of being is in control, unruffled, and 10 steps ahead of everyone else. It's timeless. The analog warmth of the recording, the slight imperfections, the sheer humanity of the performance, it can't be replicated by a computer. It feels authentic, which is the holy grail for any brand trying to connect with an audience. It's the sound of a plan coming together. It's the rhythm of a confident walk. It's the official anthem of the person who has it all figured out. And it all started because a musician was late for a recording session, and 4 guys in a hot room in Memphis decided to just jam. They didn't just create a song. They created a feeling that brands would be chasing for the next 60 years. A feeling of pure, unadulterated American cool. From the smoky, intimate groove of a Memphis studio, we now pivot to the other end of the spectrum. We leave behind the raw, the gritty, the soulful. Our next piece of music isn't about what's happening in the room. It's about what's happening on a planetary scale. It's a sound that swaps bluesy swagger for cosmic awe. We're moving from the personal to the universal, from a feeling of being cool to a feeling of being part of something immense, something epic. This next piece isn't just a song. It's a symphony in miniature, a sound that promises not just a better product, but a better future. And that promise of a better future, what does it sound like? For an entire generation, it sounded like a hypnotic, cascading loop of electronic notes. A sound that felt less like it was played by human hands, and more like it was channeled from a circuit board dreaming of infinity. It's a sound that doesn't begin so much as it emerges, a pulsing mathematical rhythm that builds anticipation with every single cycle. It's the sound of a starting line, the hum of a powerful engine just before it roars to life. It's the feeling of pure, unadulterated potential, a sonic representation of the journey, not the destination. It's the iconic, world-altering synthesizer intro to Baba O'Reilly by The Who. And right away, let's clear something up. For millions of us, this song isn't called Baba O'Reilly. It's called Teenage Wasteland. That famous anthemic chorus is so powerful, so defining, that it has completely overshadowed the song's actual title for 50 years. But the story of the song, and specifically that futuristic instrumental loop that opens it, is far more complex and fascinating than a simple teenage anthem. It's a story of spiritual gurus, avant-garde composers, and a failed science fiction rock opera that was so ambitious, it nearly broke one of rock's greatest minds. The year is 1971. Pete Townshend, the brilliant and often tormented guitarist and songwriter for The Who, is working on a project called Lifehouse. This wasn't just an album, it was a multimedia epic. The story was set in a dystopian future where pollution has made real-life experience impossible. The population lives in futuristic pods, plugged into a virtual network called the Grid, experiencing life through simulations. A small band of rebels rediscovers rock and roll and plans a massive concert to break everyone free from their digital prison. Sound familiar? It was the Matrix decades before the Matrix. Townshend was trying to find a sound that represented this fusion of humanity and technology. He wasn't just writing songs, he was trying to create a system where he could feed the biometric data of a person, their heart rate, their astrological chart, their unique human signature, into a synthesizer and generate a piece of music that was uniquely them. It was an incredibly heady, futuristic concept. And at the center of this experiment was a brand new instrument, the Lowrey Berkshire Deluxe Tuba 1 organ. This wasn't just any organ. The Lowrey had a feature that was revolutionary for the time, a kind of primitive sequencer or arpeggiator. Townshend discovered that if he held down multiple keys, the organ wouldn't just play a chord. It would play the individual notes in a rapid, repeating pattern. By feeding the vital statistics of his spiritual guru, Meher Baba, into the synthesizer, this is the pattern that emerged. That hypnotic, shimmering loop isn't just a cool riff. In Pete Townshend's mind, it was the musical soul of Meher Baba himself. But where did the O'Reilly part come from? That was a nod to another one of Townshend's great influences, the minimalist composer Terry Riley. Riley was famous for creating music based on repeating, interlocking patterns that slowly evolved over time, creating a trance-like state in the listener. Townshend took Riley's minimalist philosophy and Meher Baba's spiritual data, ran it through the circuits of a Lowrey organ, and created the sound of the future. Baba O'Reilly is a tribute to his two biggest inspirations, one spiritual, one musical. The Lifehouse project ultimately collapsed under the weight of its own ambition, but the songs survived, forming the backbone of the legendary album Who's Next. And Baba O'Reilly became its explosive opening statement. But here is the great irony that advertisers would later exploit. The famous line, "Teenage Wasteland," isn't a celebration. Townshend wrote it after witnessing the aftermath of the Woodstock Festival. He saw thousands of young people, supposedly part of a great countercultural awakening, lying passed over on acid in a field of mud and garbage. To him, it was a literal wasteland. The song is a lament, a cry of disillusionment. But advertisers don't hear disillusionment. They hear energy, they hear rebellion, they hear freedom. And for decades, that instrumental intro, that propulsive piano, and Keith Moon's thunderous drums have been cherry-picked to sell one thing above all else: escape. And no one did it better than Nissan. In the mid-2000s, Nissan was trying to sell its rugged SUVs, like the Pathfinder and the Xterra, to a very specific demographic, Generation X dads. Men who had traded their leather jackets for Dockers, their sports cars for minivans. Men who felt the walls of suburbia closing in. The ad campaign was brilliant in its simplicity. We see a dad, stuck in the beige monotony of his life, carpool lines, grocery shopping, PDA meetings. He looks bored, trapped. Then he hears it. That synth intro begins to pulse. It's a memory, a ghost of his younger, cooler self. He looks at his minivan with disdain. Then he sees it, a shiny new Nissan Pathfinder. The music swells. The piano crashes in, the drums kick into high gear, and he makes a decision. He ditches the minivan, hops into the SUV, and peels out of the suburbs, heading for the mountains, the desert, anywhere but here. The tagline appears, Nissan, shift and reverse. The use of Baba O'Reilly was a masterstroke. It wasn't just background music. It was the narrative engine of the entire commercial. The synthesizer loop was the sound of his internal conflict, the hum of his dormant spirit waking up. The explosion of the full band was the moment of liberation, the shift itself. The song perfectly captured that fantasy of shedding responsibility and rediscovering the wild, untamed person you used to be. It told a 30-second story of transformation, and it worked on a deep, almost primal level for its target audience. It completely ignored the song's downbeat lyrical themes, and instead weaponized its instrumental power. It sold a multi-thousand-dollar vehicle by tapping into a universal feeling, the fear that you've lost the best version of yourself. The song became an auditory permission slip to break free. Since then, the instrumental has become cultural shorthand for momentous beginnings. It became the theme song for the TV show CSI New York, its technological pulse a perfect fit for forensic science and the relentless pace of the city. It's used in movie trailers to signal an epic journey is about to begin. It's blasted in sports stadiums to pump up the crowd before the big game. That synthesizer pattern, born from a spiritual leader's data and a composer's philosophy, has become one of the most recognizable and potent sounds in our culture. It is a promise of action, a catalyst for change, a sound that says, "The waiting is over. It's time to go." It represents the rare alchemy where a piece of music becomes so iconic that its instrumental soul can be completely separated from its lyrical body, taking on a new life and a new meaning crafted not by the artist, but by the culture that consumes it. It took a sound that was once the future of music and used it to sell a nostalgic return to a more authentic, adventurous past. From the thunderous roar of a rock opera that promised to change the world, we now turn to a sound so quiet, so gentle, it could have been composed on a single piano in a silent room. But its emotional impact would prove to be just as revolutionary, selling not the dream of escape, but the comfort of arrival. That comfort is a powerful, almost primal feeling. It's the click of the front door locking behind you, the warmth of a familiar blanket, the silent understanding that for this moment, you are safe. You are home. The song that captures this feeling isn't a triumphant anthem or a driving beat. It's a whisper, a musical sigh. It is the sound of moonlight on water, composed over a century ago by a man who sought to paint with notes instead of brushes. The piece is Clair de Lune, and its composer Claude Debussy had no idea he was creating one of the most potent emotional triggers in the history of advertising. Debussy was a revolutionary, a key figure in what we call musical impressionism. Just like Monet or Renoir used dabs of color to suggest a scene rather than paint it with photorealistic detail, Debussy used notes to evoke a mood, a feeling, an atmosphere. Clair de Lune, which translates to moonlight, isn't a story with a beginning, middle, and end. It's a sensation. It's the feeling of being alone but not lonely. It's nostalgia for a memory you're not even sure you have. The melody drifts, it hesitates, it swells with a quiet passion before receding back into stillness. It's harmonically complex, yet feels incredibly simple and pure. It is, in essence, a musical vulnerability. And in the cutthroat world of advertising, where brands are desperate to seem authentic and human, vulnerability is pure gold. Think about how this music has been used. Take the world of high fashion and luxury. For decades, brands like Chanel have used Clair de Lune to sell not just a perfume, but an entire universe of elegance and romance. In these commercials, the world slows down. We see a movie star, bathed in soft light, moving through a dreamscape of Parisian rooftops or empty ballrooms. There's no hard sell, no list of features. There's just the image and the music. The piano notes fall like soft rain, and suddenly, a 5-ounce bottle of scented liquid is no longer a consumer product. It's a key to a life of sophistication, of quiet confidence, of timeless beauty. The music tells you that this product isn't loud or trendy. It's classic. It's eternal. It bypasses your rational brain and whispers directly to your aspirations. You don't just want to smell like the person on screen. You want to feel what the music is making you feel. That is the genius of its application. It transforms a transaction into a transference of emotion. But the true versatility of Clair de Lune is revealed when it's taken out of the world of unattainable luxury and placed into the heart of our everyday lives. Technology companies, particularly giants like Google and Apple, have masterfully repurposed this century-old composition to humanize the cold, hard world of circuits and code. You've seen these ads. A montage of user-submitted photos and videos. A father watching his daughter grow up through a series of video calls. A young student using a tablet to connect with his grandfather miles away. And underneath it all, the gentle, reassuring notes of Debussy's piano. Here, the music serves a completely different, yet equally powerful purpose. It's not selling a dream of what you could be. It's validating the beauty of what you already are. It takes the potentially sterile and impersonal nature of technology and imbues it with warmth, nostalgia, and profound human connection. The music says, this isn't about gigabytes or processor speeds. This is about your life, your memories, your love. It creates a narrative where the technology becomes an invisible, benevolent force, facilitating the moments that truly matter. The quiet, introspective nature of Clair de Lune provides the perfect emotional space for the viewer to project their own family, their own memories, their own feelings of love and loss onto the screen. The ad stops being an ad, and for 60 seconds, it becomes a poignant short film about the human condition, brought to you by a tech company. It's a devastatingly effective strategy. The product becomes synonymous with the deepest, most cherished parts of our lives. So why does this specific piece of music hold such a unique power? It's because Clair de Lune operates on a principle of emotional ambiguity. It's sad, but it's also hopeful. It's simple, but it's also deeply complex. It doesn't tell you how to feel. It creates a space and invites you to feel something. In a 30-second commercial slot, where you're fighting for every millisecond of a viewer's attention, that's a superpower. The music is an emotional shortcut. It doesn't need to build a narrative from scratch. It taps into a pre-existing reservoir of emotion within us. It's the sound of reflection, of memory, of quiet contemplation. By pairing their product with that sound, advertisers are essentially borrowing its emotional gravity. They're hitching their wagon to one of the most beautiful and evocative pieces of music ever written, hoping that a little of its starlight will reflect onto their brand. And for over a generation, it has worked to perfection. It has sold us dreams in a bottle and memories on a hard drive, all with the same delicate, haunting melody. From the intimate, solitary beauty of a single piano, we now pivot to the other extreme. We leave the quiet room of personal reflection and step onto the field of battle, the floor of the stock exchange, the starting line of the Olympic Games. We move from the music of the individual soul to the music of collective ambition. It's a sound that doesn't whisper, it roars. A sound built not from delicate arpeggios, but from thundering drums, soaring string sections, and colossal choirs. It is the sound of human potential unleashed, the soundtrack to impossible odds and epic victory. It's the music that makes you want to stand up and fight, to build an empire, to run through a brick wall. And one specific instrumental track, born not in a 19th century salon but in a 21st century production studio, would come to define this sound for an entire generation of movie trailers, video games, and of course commercials that needed to sell you something far more potent than perfume or technology. They needed to sell you the feeling of invincibility. And while that epic, world-ending sound became the go-to for selling blockbuster experiences, our number one spot goes to a piece of music that sold something just as grand, but infinitely more personal. It sold the American dream one flight at a time. It's a song that doesn't just suggest aspiration. It sounds like the skyline of New York City itself, bursting with jazz, ambition, and the chaotic, beautiful rhythm of a nation on the move. You know this sound. You've heard it for decades. It's that iconic soaring clarinet glissando that slides up into a symphony of urban energy. It's the soundtrack to men and women in sharp suits striding through airports, to families reuniting in tearful hugs, to the sheer breathtaking view of a country unfolding beneath the clouds. For over 30 years, this wasn't just a song in a commercial. It was the sonic soul of an entire airline. It was George Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue, and it was the anthem for United Airlines. The story of how this masterpiece of American music became inextricably linked with commercial aviation is a masterclass in branding. But first, you have to understand the story of the song itself. It was 1924, and a young 25-year-old composer named George Gershwin was making a name for himself writing popular songs for Broadway. But he had bigger ambitions. He wanted to fuse the raw, electrifying energy of American jazz with the complexity and prestige of the classical concert hall. Then, a prominent bandleader named Paul Whiteman commissioned Gershwin to write a concerto-like piece for an upcoming concert titled An Experiment in Modern Music. The problem? Gershwin was on a tight deadline, with only a few weeks to compose a masterpiece. The legend goes that the core ideas for Rhapsody in Blue came to him on a train ride to Boston, the clatter and rhythm of the tracks inspiring the melodies in his head. He scribbled furiously, and what emerged was a sprawling, audacious piece of music that was unlike anything anyone had ever heard. That famous opening clarinet wail? It was actually a happy accident. During rehearsal, the clarinetist, as a joke, played the opening run as a long, exaggerated glissando. Gershwin loved it so much, he told him to play it that way from then on. It was a perfect symbol for the piece itself. A little bit of playful, improvisational jazz breaking into the formal world of classical music. The premiere was a sensation. It cemented Gershwin's legacy and created a piece of music that was, and still is, the definitive sound of 20th century America. Fast forward 50 years to the mid-1970s, United Airlines was looking for a new identity. They wanted to position themselves not just as a carrier, but as the premier airline for the American business traveler. They needed a campaign that felt sophisticated, powerful, and quintessentially American. Their ad agency, Leo Burnett, made a brilliant, audacious move. Instead of commissioning a jingle, they licensed Rhapsody in Blue. It was a massive investment, but they understood something profound. Gershwin's music already contained all the feelings they wanted to sell. The song's dynamic shifts, from bustling, energetic passages to slow, romantic moments, perfectly mirrored the life of a traveler. The frantic, piano-driven sections were the hustle of the city, the rush to the airport. The sweeping orchestral swells were the majesty of flight, the feeling of soaring above the world. The quiet, contemplative melodies were the moments of reflection at 30,000 feet, the bittersweet feeling of leaving one place for another. The first commercials were cinematic short films. They showed the ballet of airport ground crews, the focused faces of pilots, the handshake that closes a deal, all set to Gershwin's magnificent score. The tagline was "Fly the Friendly Skies." But the music said so much more. It said, "We are the airline of American ambition. We are the airline that connects the great cities of this nation. Flying with us is not just a trip, it's an event." For decades, that music was a constant. Through changes in aircraft, uniforms, and logos, Rhapsody in Blue remained. It became so deeply embedded with the brand that hearing the first few notes of that clarinet could make you smell jet fuel and picture a gate agent's smile. It was the single most successful and long-running use of a classical piece in modern advertising history. It worked because it elevated the product. It transformed the mundane act of air travel into a poetic, aspirational experience. United wasn't just selling you a seat on a plane. They were selling you a piece of the American symphony. And in the end, that's the thread that connects all of these incredible pieces of music. From the quiet, introspective melancholy of Nick Drake selling us on a nighttime drive, to the cool, confident strut of Booker T, and the MGs making a heist feel aspirational. From the thundering, apocalyptic choirs of Two Steps from Hell convincing us of our own invincibility, to the jazzy, symphonic sweep of Gershwin turning an airline into a national icon. These aren't just jingles. They are powerful, standalone works of art that advertisers were smart enough to borrow. They are emotional shortcuts. In 30 or 60 seconds, they have to make you feel something: nostalgia, excitement, confidence, peace, wonder. A great instrumental track bypasses the part of our brain that analyzes marketing slogans and speaks directly to the part that feels. It becomes the unseen character in the story, the emotional engine driving the entire message home. The images sell the product, but the music sells the feeling. And that feeling is what we remember long after the commercial has faded to black. These songs become part of the fabric of our culture, forever tangled up with the products they help to sell. They are the background music to our lives, the anthems of our aspirations, and the undeniable proof that sometimes, the most powerful voice in the room is the one that never says a word.